Hello. It feels so weird to be on here by myself and not with a group of amazing people. But hi, hello. A little bit for those of you who are joining for the first time, we are GutPunchRP. We are a streaming channel that is focused on role playing games, particularly of the tabletop variety, as well as diverse storytelling and charity. Little bit of business before jumping into all the science. We are a charity stream channel and we are currently raising money for the Transgender Law Center. You can type !charity into the chat to find out more about them, but Transgender Law Center changes law, policy, and attitudes so that all people can live safely, authentically, and free from discrimination, regardless of their gender identity or expression. And we are currently working on, currently have some prizes up for donations. If you donate at least $1 or more, you could win your chance to win these plushies that we'll be giving away, as plus some other things in that. That drawing is going through March 31st. You can type !donate into the chat to get a link to our Tiltify event for that. Additionally, we are sponsored by Dungeons Gate. Dungeons Gate is a Midwestern gaming store with a diverse selection of board games, card games, TTRPGs, dice, minis, and accessories, as well as sci-fi, fantasy books, and graphic novels for all ages. Currently, we are sitting at $190 that have been donated, and we would love to see that get to $300 by March 31st. So if you would, donate and maybe get a chance to win some cool plushies. All right. Let me jump back over to this other screen. And let's go ahead and get into some science. So thank you all for joining. Today I'm going to be talking about a little research project that I put together. The title of this talk is Critical Success, Analysis of How and Why People Watch TTRPG Actual Plays. A little bit about me before we get into it. My name is Jessica Swanner. You can find me on all the things in the stuff as DrPsychOwl, except for on Twitter where I'm DrPsychOwl TV. I earned my PhD in experimental psychology way back in 2010. I'm trained in both quantitative and qualitative methodologies, and I have been a user experience researcher since 2017. So I used to be an academic doing the academic thing, and then in 2017, I got out of academia, left it for industry. The reason why I'm telling you this is because that helps you get a little bit of a better picture of the approach that I used with this research project. So a little bit about that. Also, by the way, if you have any questions as we go, I do have the chat open. So I'll try to catch questions as we go, but if I miss any, I do have some of the Gut Punch people keeping track of chat, and they will feed me questions at the end or as we go along, and I will be able to get them and answer them. So also a little bit about this. I have about an hour's worth of material to present to you, but the more questions we get, the longer this ends up going, and I want to be able to answer as many of your questions as possible. All right. So the reason I brought up user experience in particular is because that is the approach that I took to this project. Why? Okay. Why did I leave academia? A little bit of that is I value research first and foremost. That is I love research. I didn't care as much for the grading side of things or the like the academic service side of things. I also didn't like the idea of the whole publish or perish that you have to do as an academic. I like having research that is super actionable, plus and having immediacy, and I got that in the tech world, which is where I ended up landing. so that the research that I do, when I conduct it, I can see immediately it being impacting the product that ends up getting built. There's also some other stuff, but you know, it's a little TLDR of it. Anyway, so the reason I brought up user experience research is that that this is a process that involves gathering insights about users' behaviors, their needs, their pain points through the process of observation techniques as well as feedback methodology. Ultimately, the goal of user experience research is to gain context and perspectives that allow people to make more informed decisions and build products that are centered around their users. So, this approach works really well. So what I ended up doing with this is I took the approach of doing user experience research. So in that, with that being, a TTRPG is the ultimate, or actual play is the ultimate product that you're trying to create. In order to make a product that serves your audience, you need to understand your audience's perspectives to be able to make those informed decisions. So you need to know what their behaviors are about watching or listening to actual plays. What are the things that they want from them? What are the things that they don't want from them? So with that perspective in mind, that is the approach that I took to this research, to ultimately help people have actionable evidence that they could use to when they're creating their APs. A process of insight checks. Nice, no fame. Okay, another little bit about why this project. So I was probably doom scrolling through Twitter and one day, and not one day, it was across multiple days. And I noticed there were a lot of anecdotes flying around about what people should or shouldn't do, or the things that they should avoid when they're making a TTRPG actual play. And me being the researcher that I am, I was like, but based on what evidence? And one of my favorite quotes from academia that it's one of those ones that you don't really know the source of it. And I've honestly never taken the time to go and look at the source, but the plural of anecdote is not data. And I like making data-informed decisions. And so ultimately the goal for this project was to help people have a better understanding of their audiences. So I started by creating a survey. The ultimate goal was to hopefully get about 500 participants responding to the survey. But if I got around 300, I would be okay with that. I ended up getting 311, but once I was able to get rid of the bots and other kind of like bad responses from it, it ended up being a total sample size of 270, which is a little shorter than I wanted it to be, but it's still gonna has good insights and has good reliability. Additionally, in order to add some nuance to the data, I conducted 7 one-on-one individual interviews. Also, it's important to note that with this data collection, the data was collected largely in December of 2022, so just this past December, and that means that it happened before all of the OGL news came out. So all of the data is from that point in time. So if I was to replicate this, odds are I would get pretty much the same results, but there may be some differences because of the OGL news that happened. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to present some of the demographics so you can get a feel for who are the people who are responding to this survey. I talk with my hands. I apologize. I'm going to try not to hit my microphone too much during this, but I just hit it then. So again, a total of 270 people ended up responding to the survey. I used what's called a snowball sampling technique for data collection. So what this means is that I created a link and I shared it on social media, and I asked other people to share it on social media. So there is a little bit of bias in my sample because the people who follow me may have similar identities, similar ideas as I do. But hopefully I was able to spread it out enough that we got a nice diverse sample. So additionally, some things to note about the survey is that I explicitly asked people not to respond based on any APs that they are actually in, but the APs that they consume. And I'm going to use the word consume to mean how the method in which people get the AP. So typically people either watch or listen to APs. But for the duration of this talk, I'm going to use the word consume. It's not my favorite word for it, but it gets the job done. So again, I explicitly ask people to think about the stuff that they consume, not necessarily their home games or the games that they participate in. Okay. So the breakdown of some of the demographics. Most of the people were from the US. The samples largely people in their 20s to 30s. Got a question in the chat. What do you think the general population looks like for AP consumers? I would say that it's probably on par with this sample, because whenever you're sampling, ultimately what is happening when you're sampling is that sample should generalize to the population. And so anytime you sample and you sample again, it's going to be trying to predict that population. So your best guess for what the population is what your sample is. And given that we have a sample size of around 270 people, odds are that's going to be good enough or within the margin of error for us to be able to predict the larger population. So my guess, my best educated guess would be that the actual population is not going to be that far off from this sample. Now, with the caveat that in general, when it comes to research and research participation, if this was an academic thing, I wouldn't include any respondents who were under the age of 18 because they are considered a protected class. So there may be a bit more of people who are younger out there who watch or consume APs. So that may be the portion that is missing from this sample. All right, good questions. All right, a little bit more of the demographics. So I asked asked people to self-identify for their gender identity. This was a multi-select question. Yeah, I like I am a quantitative researcher primarily by training, and then qualitative by practice. So I allowed people to multi-select with this item. So if somebody could select non-binary and cis woman, they could also choose to not disclose, and they could provide something that was not listed and then write in a response. So largely most of the sample is cis, but we did get a nice amount of people who present as a non-binary, trans, fluctuating questioning. In terms of racial and ethnic identity, I also allowed for that same kind of multi-select option. This is predominantly a white sample, but again, some people did select white and other races, or white, multiracial, things of that nature. All right, so that pretty much rounds out the demographics portion of the data, and we're going to start jumping into the findings. But first, I'm going to take a sip of water because it's been a hot minute since I've had to talk for a real long time without any breaks. Hydrate or dihydrate. Thank you, chat. Okay, so all right, so here we have some of the findings. So the first question that I asked people was, do you participate in actual plays? And about half of the sample that I got participated in actual plays, which is nice because that means what we can do is we can slice our data by this person variable. So this is a variable that people are self-selecting, and a group that we are having them self-select into, as opposed to just assigning them to a condition for our quantitative researchers in training. So for this, we have half of our sample who participate in APs, and among those who participate in APs, half of them, well, about 60% of them are players. Half of them are showrunners, GMs, people who produce, running the tech side of things, community managers at about 30%, channel moderators at roughly around 20%, and then other, there was one person who mentioned being graphic design, and there was another person who mentioned doing sound production. Again, this is a multi-select question, meaning that they could select multiple items in the list. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears and start talking about the amount of TTRPG APs that we're going to go into the amount of TTRPG consumption. So respondents, when asked how, on average, how many hours per week they consume of TTRPGs, that ended up being roughly 9 hours weekly. Okay, so I've got a question in chat, so hang on, I'm gonna look at that first. So 54% of participate in APs. Wow, is there anything insightful that AP consumers are also those that likely to create? So I think part of the reason I got 54%, I actually think that is gonna be lower than would be in the general population, partly because, again, because I use that snowball sampling, that the people who follow me or follow the channels who are likely people who retweeted are also people who participate in APs, because there's a lot of networking that goes on. So I think that is a little higher. But is there anything insightful that... Hi, it's us. We're the problem. It's us. Yes, absolutely. Is there marked edge? There we go. I can read it. Could I get you to rephrase the second part of your question? I'm having a little hard time processing it, which may just be that I'm on stream and having a bit of a time. Anyway, but I'm going to keep moving on. So one of the things that I asked, and this is important to note, that people are not very good at recognizing the frequency in which they do an activity, unless it is something that is very regular and like set in a schedule. So when you ask people the amount of time that they spend exercising per week, if they don't have a dedicated time with a personal trainer, they may not, or like a dedicated time that they actually go to the gym and they go there every day for that amount of time, they're not going to be good at it. Plus there's also there is that knowing that you should be exercising about 20 minutes every day. And because there is that should component to it, people tend to overestimate it. So after I asked people how many hours weekly they spend consuming APs, I also asked them, true or false, you overestimated that number. Wink, wink, we're not going to judge you. And what I found is that about 37% of the people said that they overestimated the amount of time. And part of that is just because, maybe I watch Critical Role every Thursday that it comes out, but sometimes I miss it, or, like I say I watch these other shows, but then sometimes I miss them. And then, yeah, but what's interesting is if we slice our data by that who participates in APs, what I found was that people who participate in APs say they consume more APs than those who are audience only. So for the purpose of this, I'm going to refer to audience as people who are audience only, and then participate are the participate in APs. So people who participate in APs significantly watch or report significantly more hours watching or consuming APs. However, half of them overestimated that. So in survey construction, there's a term called a demand characteristic. So if you're somebody who participates in AP, part of what you do should be consuming APs. I use the term should to be the not that you actually should be doing it, but that there's that mindset that maybe I should be doing it. And so there's the kind of the idea that you should be saying that you're watching more, or that you feel like you need to be watching more APs. You need to be supporting your friends who are also producing their own APs. So people who participate in APs were more likely to overestimate than those people who are audience only. Only a few people in the audience only said that they overestimated. What's also great about asking a question like this is that when you do that, it also sets people up when they're taking the survey to be more honest for all of the following questions as they go through it. It's a nice little way to kind of like a gotcha question to help make people be a little bit more authentic when they're responding to surveys. Okay, so I also asked people about the ideal session length, and on average, most people said, or it was roughly around 3 hours is that sweet spot for a session length or an episode length. Yeah, it's it's like DrPsychOwl knows psychology or something. So yeah, 3 hours is kind of that sweet spot on average. But also there's a minimum of 1 hour that was reported and a maximum of 6 hours. So that gives you a range of the scores for time, but roughly around 3 is your nice little sweet spot. What's interesting, so no fame, what's interesting is I kind of, and I think I may want to take a look at this data in particular, based on the, like splice the data based on the platform that people use for consuming APs, because my guess is that 3 hours is probably that kind of spot for Twitch, because typically even when you're looking at just regular streams, the recommendation is 4 hours. So it may be different based on the platform that's being used. Anecdotally, when we started splitting our episodes at the break, we saw our YouTube views go up. So like that hour and a half, or the 1 to 2 hours helped with YouTube. Again, that's anecdotally based on our channel. And so this is more work for me to do, to like look into the data to see whether or not the platform impacts this data in particular. Additionally, I did ask people, but I don't have this up here, that what would be kind of the ideal length of number of episodes if people had to play catch up to get current with it. And that range was large. It was between 1 to 150, with a median of 30 and a mean of 44. So I don't know that there's a good insight to gather from that, especially because there was so much variability in the responses for that one item. All right, but speaking of catching up or binging, Critical Role 150. So I asked people to rank the kind of the ideal when you watch the or consume the session. Do you want it as soon as possible? Like, do you want to watch it or consume it live, or roughly within the first 2 weeks? Do you want to have some episodes to catch up on? Do you wait for an entire season or arc? Or do you wait for the entire campaign or show to have ended to ensure that there actually is an end before you get invested? And most people, the number one and number two are really close to each other, that the either live as it airs or within those first 2 weeks. So it's safe to say that most people, if they had their choice, would be consuming an AP as soon as possible. So as soon as it airs or within those first 2 weeks. We can speculate as to whether that's to avoid spoilers or whatnot, but odds are they like to be as soon as possible. Also, this pattern holds for both people who participate in APs and those who are audience only. I also asked people how, kind of when they started consuming APs. And this one was interesting. And I wanted to present all three measures of central tendency here. So on average, people started consuming APs in 2017 was kind of the average, whereas the middlemost one, the median, was 2018. But interestingly, the most frequently occurring year that people started was 2020. And I also saw a lot of, or I heard from a lot of people during the interviews that that COVID was, and the pandemic was really what got people into APs. That I heard from a couple of people who never really watched APs, but pretty much played D&D and other TTRPGs all the time, but then were locked in their small apartments or their apartments, and then had no means of being able to play the games with the friends that they normally would. And so they got into APs as a way of feeling like they were at the table. So it's important to note that 30% of the respondents started consuming APs post-COVID. All right, so now let's move on to some of the streaming platforms and the TTRPG systems that people consume. And I'm gonna sneak a drink real quick. All right. So the most widely used platform for consuming TTRPG actual plays is YouTube, followed by Twitch, then Dropout. Interestingly, only 6 respondents in the entire sample consume APs exclusively in an audio platform for podcasts. The respondents who used other platforms largely used miscellaneous podcast applications. Further, 28% of the respondents use at least one podcast platform, typically in addition to one of these other visual platforms. Now, interestingly, not just because someone is using a visual platform to consume the AP doesn't mean that they're watching it. A lot of people are multitasking and will be doing something that doesn't require looking at the screen, but then will reference the screen when something gets exciting, or if they feel like they missed something, or if they need to check to see who is the person who is talking right now, especially when you have a cast that has very similar voices or very similar accents. They will sometimes use the visual indicators. So they don't necessarily want to be audio only. They like having the option to be able to look up at the screen. Yes, absolutely. The older episodes are easier to access through YouTube. And yeah, but it was very interesting that just like just a very, very small chunk of the sample were audio only, that most people use a variety of platforms to consume APs. Yeah, and we'll also return because I later in this I ask people how they learn about APs, and one of the things that I didn't think of when I was creating this survey, but it came up in the open responses, was that they let YouTube's algorithm recommend next ones. Not to spoil myself, but spoil. All right. For the next slide. It's literally the next slide. I'm being silly. Anyway, so how do people find a new AP to consume? The number one way is through word of mouth. So it comes from recommendations from friends, from colleagues, from those you know. The next biggest way is through social media. So finding out about yeah, the passive multitasking was really cool to find out about. The so people, for the most part, they find out about APs from word of mouth through social media. There is some people who find them through browse and search. I did ask people about in the interviews about browsing and searching, and so typically when people are finding, at least from the, not necessarily typically, but nuance from the interviews was that when people are finding it through browsing, they're looking for a particular system. So it's, I'm going to find an AP for Monster of the Week. I'm going to find an AP for Blades in the Dark. It's not a, I'm looking for, you know, it's usually a system-driven search. Some people said message board sites. Exactly. They show me how Delta Green is played is a great example. Some people find them through content creators that they follow and like. So if you find out that your favorite, DM from No Fame podcast is also going to play in something else, then you are going to go and watch that thing. It's Justin. We love Justin. And then a couple of people said that they let the YouTube algorithm show them. Okay. Up next, we have the different systems that are used in TTRPG actual plays that people consume. And Oh, buddy. We all knew this was coming. We all knew that Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition was going to be the number one. We're not shocked by that by any means. By far, most respondents consume at least one D&D 5e actual play. We have nearly 70% of the sample have consume at least one D&D 5e. Further, 16% of respondents only consume D&D 5e. So just under 20%, that's the only one. Whereas the next highest was World of Darkness. And that's only consumed by 28% of the respondents. Again, note, this was pre-OGL news. But if you look on Twitch and you look at the number of people who are streaming Dungeons and Dragons versus the people who are in the tabletop RPG section, World of Darkness is Vampire the Masquerade, mage, werewolf. So yeah, it's a big jump from the most to the next one. So again, this would be interesting to see in the coming months if this still holds or if things shift around a little bit. All right. Okay, up next, I asked people about their purchases regarding TTRPG APs. So I asked people on average how much they spend monthly, or first it's like, do they make any purchases related to APs? And roughly 58%, so not roughly, but like 58%, so nearly 60% of the respondents make some kind of purchase related to actual plays. And the majority of the purchases are for subscriptions to a channel, merchandise, content subscriptions, such as like subscribing to a Patreon to get content that's related to the AP or get the opportunity to create an NPC, things of that nature, then followed by channel interactions. On average, people spend about $71 on AP purchases a month. Some more, some less, depending. One thing that was interesting that came up both in the interviews as well as some of the free responses that came up in the other here is that people who participate in APs have a harder time talking about and answering questions in the surveys with regards to the APs that they consume as opposed to the APs that they participate in. So I saw some responses that were buying an outfit for the AP that I was participating in, or you know, buying props for the AP that I was in. So yeah, so it's interesting, particularly from a psychological perspective, that people who participate in APs have a harder time not referring to the APs that they're in as opposed to the APs that they consume. You know, like a sweet katana. Shout out to No Fame. They have an amazing cyberpunk game that plays on alternating Fridays that the katana was a reference for. And Crampa. All right. So breaking this out, but Scrampa, that's right. Breaking this out based on people who participate in APs versus people who are audience only. People who participate in APs spend more money on APs than those who are audience only. So, and it's by a large margin. So people who are audience only are spending roughly about $30 a month on APs. So that's maybe one Twitch subscription or two Twitch subscriptions, and you know, a subscription to Dropout TV and maybe like a t-shirt or something, or some dice. But the people who, yeah, exactly. People who have worked in the service industry tip better. That is very, very true. There's also something to be said about networking, and so that you're more likely to subscribe to other channels that are APs in order to help support them. And yeah. If you do something. Yeah, it would be a good idea to add charitable contributions to the list. But interestingly, I did have an other, and people could write in, and there wasn't really anybody who put in charitable contributions as part of that. So yeah, but that could be just because that people weren't thinking about that as being purchases related to APs. But if we included it in the list, they may have, people may have selected that more. Yeah. All right. So additionally, what I ended up doing was I asked people about the different components of an AP and had them rate the importance of these different components. And the reason I did this, so going back to the beginning of me talking about how I, you know, took the perspective of being a user experience researcher and thinking about how I would do research for creating the product of an AP and what kind of things I would want to know. And importance is a key metric for being able to know what opportunities to go after. So this comes from an approach to building products called jobs to be done. And so the idea behind it is that if you can find something that is important to people, but they're not satisfied with it, that creates an opportunity that you should explore within your product. Now, I didn't ask people how satisfied they were with these things in current APs, because I feel like that's more on the people who have their individual APs to figure out how to go about figuring out satisfaction for that component for your individual AP. It's a little harder to do it in this context that I have of the survey. But if we know the importance, we know that, you know, maybe these are things we should focus on when making our AP. So a little bit more about the importance items. So what I bucketed these items in terms of audio components, video components, the stream, the content of the AP, representation of the people who are on the cast, and then just other components of the cast itself. So things like how well the cast role plays, how well they gel together, how well does the GM do at keeping the show going, and things like that. So respondents were asked to rate the importance of APs to have these certain qualities. These items covered again, the audio, those things. And the following charts represent what's called the top two box, or the percentage of respondents who responded as a 4 or a 5, meaning they indicated that these things are important or critically important on that 5-point Likert scale. So what we're looking at are the percentage of people who are saying, yes, this is important. Additionally, the scale included an NA option, meaning that people were allowed to say, you know what, this is not applicable to me or not applicable to the APs that I watch. All right, so up first, we're going to cover audio. When it comes to audio, what's really, really important is your audio quality and having balanced levels. So if you have one person on the stream who is soft and hard to hear, and then one person who tends to yell or spike, you want to make sure that that is balanced. You also want to make sure that you have clear, crisp, clean audio. This is super important. I'm gonna go ahead and spoil the end of the talk when I get to recommendations. If you only invest in one thing in your entire stream or your entire AP, it's audio. Nothing else matters. Even if you're doing a visual format, nothing else matters if you have bad audio. It's also a good idea, actually, I'm going to go back to that. It's also a good idea to check how your audio sounds on a variety of different headphones, just because not everybody listens through speakers. Not everybody listens through amazing headphones. Some people have bad earbuds, bad headphones. Just checking how you sound in different ways is a great thing to do to make sure that you're not putting people off from the get-go. Not everyone's an audiophile, exactly. All right, video. So we can see just based on the first slide that we have audio in the 75%. So 75% of respondents thought that audio, either a 4 or a 5 on the scale, was either important or critically important. When it comes to video and visual elements on your on the screen, closed captions. Accessibility is important, including closed captions, because some people mumble. Sometimes there are weird words that people say. I have pretty good ears. I still watch things on closed captions. It makes life easier. Having video quality is important, but it's nowhere near as important as audio. Having some visual, if you're gonna have visual information on the screen, it really needs to be the critically important things, like the characters' names. And it needs to be clear. And we'll get into that. No, we'll go ahead and get into it now. Do yourself a favor. If you're doing some kind of visual format, test the legibility of everything on your screen at quarter the size. Not everybody has a huge screen. Not everybody is looking at your thing full screen. Some people are looking at it half size. So, you have to have a nice, clear, legible font for everything that is on the screen. And yeah, so I was kind of surprised that a combat map was seen as less important. But interestingly, combat maps, be it either physical or digital, are seen as not as important for the audience, but is seen as important for people who participate in APs. And this is going to be one of the examples where I'm going to advocate for the people who participate in APs, because me being, me being a player, being able to have the map allows me to be more creative when thinking about what I want to do as a player. It also, even as a GM, allows me to be more creative when I'm describing things because I have the map to refer to. And yeah, you're completely right that it varies from game to game. It's way more important in games that have crunchier combat systems like D&D than Blades. Yeah, Old Slow Tiger, 100% correct. But keeping that in mind, a healthy chunk of our sample responds to D&D. Was responding based on D&D stuff. Also reiterate that the audience is multitasking and is giving priority to audio presentation, but will look from time to time to check what's going on visually. So again, make sure your visual components are as clean and neat as possible. All right. Now, a note about edited actual plays. With regards to editing, the data yielded a bimodal distribution. So for the non-quantitative researchers in the audience, what that means is that if I were to lay out the distribution of the scores in this study, I get a peak at the low end, meaning not at all important, and a peak at the high end as being important and critically for asking about edited content. And when I segment the data based on the people who participate in APs and those that are audience only, the results indicate that the people who participate in APs viewed editing as important, whereas those who do not participate in APs, the people who are audience only, do not think it's important. In fact, based on some of the free responses that I'll talk about a little bit more later on, people don't like when it's edited, particularly when it feels like the gameplay has been removed from the AP or feels like they missed things as part of the gameplay. Remember, 30% of these the people in this survey started watching and consuming APs as part of the pandemic and shutdown and not being able to play. And so if they started consuming this to feel, at least in part, to feel like they are at the table. And so when things are edited away from the table, it can feel like they're not as present at the table. They didn't get to experience everything that the people at the table experienced. And it can also start to feel scripted for people. Which one of the things that people mention that they don't like is when it feels scripted or if it is scripted. Oh, additionally, people also mentioned that they like, one of the reasons why they consume APs is that they want to be able to learn mechanics. And so if the mechanics are something that's getting edited away, they're not going to be able to learn them as easily. Also, not everything has to be perfect. Some of the responses were that some of the things that people really like about APs is the improvisational element to them. These are games. Dice add randomness. Player ingenuity adds something. This is not a pre-written story that is being presented. This is not a radio drama. It's a game. And that's what makes APs special. When asked in the interviews about people's favorite moments from APs, those moments that people talked about and lit up about were things where the player was bringing some bit of their own experience to the characterization, and that it was a moment that happened as part of this improvisational, and they couldn't improvisational nature of it, and it was so captivating that people had to keep watching. And or it was player ingenuity, the dust of deliciousness from campaign 2 of Critical Role, where people are using some object that were given to them way earlier in the campaign, in order to make this really amazing move. It's moments like that. And so when things get edited, and people are allowed to do like retakes, it takes away some of the thinking on your toes that you do in the game. And it's those moments are more special because you were able to do something clever in the moment, or you hit the line right there, you thought of the clever witty thing to say right away. It's that improvisational nature of these games that is part of the magic of them. So that doesn't say that you shouldn't edit. It just says that if you're going to edit, remember that it's okay to have imperfections. It's not okay to lose the core of the game and to rely so heavily on reshoots that you lose all of the improvisational nature of the game, because that's part of what people love about APs. All right. So now on to stream quality. So really and truly with stream quality, what you need is a stable internet connection. It's really the thing that is important is having a stable internet connection. So if you're going to invest in your AP, first and foremost, invest in sound. Second, invest in that stream quality. If you don't have a stable internet connection, then maybe pre-recording is the way to go. Instead of doing a live stream, or doing your recording, edit it together so that you don't have the blips and the blobs, and then that come from lower latency and dropped frames, and then publish on YouTube, or do audio only or something along those lines. But if you're gonna invest in the stream quality. Interestingly, so I haven't mentioned this much, but this is one of the instances where when it comes to the importance of chat moderation is important for people who participate in APs more than audience only. And it's particularly important for those people who are not white or cisgendered. So chat moderation helps keep your players and the table safe, and it is considered a safety tool. And so make sure you have good chat moderation, and good moderators to be able to help with your stream. If you're streaming, not everybody streams on Twitch, but yeah, making sure you keep track of the YouTube comments and all of those, making a safe space for folks is great. Live chat isn't as important to people, and neither are channel emotes, but again, it is important for people who participate in APs, but they're also spending more money, so make sure you have good emotes for the people who are spending money. Okay. I'm doing that thing where I'm not looking at my notes and I'm just talking, so I'm having to do the did I get everything? Got everything. Cool. All right. Up next is the content. So for this one, I ended up consulting a couple of folks, both in the channel as well as off the channel, of things that I should include for some of the content items. And so when it came to this, I asked people about, you know, story, role play, humor, drama, having high stakes, exploration, the game mechanics, combat, and romance. And story is king. So having a good story is important. So have good audio, have good stream, have a good story, have strong role play. And when I talk about role play, from some of the free responses, role play for role play's sake is not necessarily good. Role play that drives the story forward is the sweet spot. So when the role play is important to the story and when it's driving it forward, that is chef's kiss. Having some humor to lighten even serious toned stories is awesome. Having drama and having things feel weighty is also good. So some of the free responses, people like when risky actions have consequences. People like that it feels like there's progress. People like when people like when the world is taken seriously. But there's a nice balance in there, and more on balance in just a little bit. Yes. So roleplay is important so long as it serves the story, like I said, and so long as main character syndrome is avoided. Because main character syndrome is one of the big things that came up around what people don't like in actual plays. When people don't share the spotlight or hog the spotlight or self-insert themselves into all of scenes. Yeah. Representation. So in terms of representation, gender representation, LGBTQIA plus, BIPOC, body positivity, and disabled community representation is seen as important by the majority of people who responded. More so for those people who are not cisgendered or white. For people who are minorities, this importance is quite a bit higher. That representation matters, particularly for those people who are not cisgendered or white. So yeah. So if you're going to produce an AP, consider representation in your cast. Because there were a number of people who even free responded that if you do not have representation, they won't even watch your AP. They will pass by it. All right. I just confused myself looking at a different screen. All right. So up next are the components of the cast. So I specifically asked about how well the cast works together as a group, how well the showrunner leads the actual play, how well the cast role plays, and how well the cast knows the game mechanics. And in terms of these 4 items, how well the cast works together as a group is the most important, followed by the DM or the GM leading the group. And if you keep in mind some of the couple of things that I mentioned, which I'll get into more in just a minute, but like, you know, keeping the group on task as much as possible, keeping the story going, keeping the pace moving for the GM or the DM. Having a cast that is bought into the world and bought into the story is important. And then also a cast that is respectful to one another, and that kind of gels as a group is going to be the most important for your AP. So this is where I'm going to say session zeros are super important. It's not just about safety tools. It's also about making sure everybody kind of vibes together. Having a group that works well together is going to serve you when it comes to making your AP. I forgot what I was about to say on that sentence. So having a group that works well is really going to serve you for your AP. And then having a showrunner that's going to be able to keep it moving and keep the pace going is going to be important. Having somebody who knows when or knows how to linger on moments that need a little bit more exploration versus keeping the plot going and moving on to the next thing. Whereas knowing the game mechanics is a little less important. So now we're going to jump into the qualitative responses. But before we dig into too much of those, I'm going to take a sip. And if anybody has any questions thus far that I haven't addressed or anything, go ahead and drop them in the chat and we'll take a little question break. And I'll move away from my mic in case I was making sipping sounds into it. Sorry. And in 3, 2, 1. Okay, Justin. It's almost like it's my job. All right. So the qualitative responses. So what I ended up doing is I asked people, open-ended, what are your 3 favorite things about APs? And what are your 3 least favorite things? And so then I took all of those responses and I coded them or bucketed them into groups. So I grouped like responses or kind of made categories for each of those responses so that then we can take a look at what are the things that people liked. And interestingly, when it came to the favorite things, excuse me, when it came to the favorite things, people were more in agreement than the least favorite things. So the least favorite things are a bit more idiosyncratic, whereas the things that people like, there's a bit more agreement in the sample for those. Also, interestingly, people who participated in APs were less likely to answer the free responses than the people who were audience only. So AP participants, shame on you. Just kidding. They were just less likely to answer those open-ended responses. So again, there's more agreement and consensus around the favorites, but of those items that people responded to favorites, there were 404 responses that got coded. So instead of talking about the sample or the number of respondents here, we're going to talk about the number of coded responses. So we have 400, a little over 400 coded responses. What are the favorite things? The biggest chunk is story. So people like story. They like that that there is a solid story, that the plot is focused on the story, that people are bought into story, that the world building is part of the story, that they like it when combat is part of the story. So it's all of the things around having a good story that people are working towards. And I use the term working towards because TTRPGs are a collaborative story. It's not a showrunner that is telling a story. The story unfolds through the player's actions and the consequences that come from the dice rolls, typically. Next is cast cohesion. So people like it when the cast work well together, that they share the spotlight, they get along, they're all having fun, that even in the scary dark moments of games, if they have that, they're all still kind of having fun. People like role play. They like when the role play is good, and they like when the role play is serving the story. They also like when there's a little bit of humor in there. Then followed by having interesting characters, having players who collaborate with one another, having an interesting world, in integrating the mechanics into roleplay, and then things like watching people have fun, watching creative decision making, being able to learn mechanics, things like that, memorable moments and reactions to things. Reactions specifically, there was one that was a great one where it's like, somebody likened getting a nat 20 to making a touchdown in football. That, like, when you see them get that nat 20, you're yelling like you're watching a sporting event. So, and again, it kind of gets back to that, like, feeling like you're at the table, celebrating the wins with the people who are playing, liking when players are engaged. I use the term celebrity here because people called out specific celebrities during in some of these items. They did mention there were some parasocial stuff that was mentioned. So, like, yeah, so feeling like you know the person, or getting to know the person. And player equity, being a good player and sharing the spotlight. I bucketed other as any what I'm going to refer to as idiosyncratic. So basically responses where it was just one person said this, one person said this. I clumped all of those single responses into other. And so it was only 5.5% of these coded responses got grouped into the other category. Whereas when you look at the least favorite, 13.6% of those got grouped into the other category. So when I said that what people dislike is a bit more idiosyncratic. So, like, for every one person who said too much combat, there's also another person that says too much role play. But where people agree are things like they don't like audio. Going back to the importance, audio is important. They don't like when players seem not prepared, or they're not paying attention, or they're not being respectful to one another. Combat came up a decent amount in the things that people don't like, but specifically with combat, what people were saying is that they don't like when combat is slow, when combat gets bogged down, when combat gets so rote that people are not where they're not really doing anything, or they're doing the exact same thing, or they're describing it, or they've stopped describing it. They don't like when role play completely drops away because combat is happening. Because again, if you look at some of the things that they like integration of role play with mechanics. They like a combat that is exciting, or that has weight to it, or a combat that has role play elements in it. They don't like when pacing gets off, when things get slow, when things get bogged down, when things are, you know, it's kind of like finding that sweet spot of action but time to breathe and everything. People don't like when some people called out session length. So specifically that sometimes, these sessions are long. A lot of times it's 4 to 6 hours, and people have a hard time paying attention for all of that. So again, remember, people are multitasking. Which, speaking of people are multitasking, I know this is one of the things that I think it may have been one that only one person brought up, but I will mention it, like having recaps help with some of that attention. So being able to recap what happened last time helps. Lengthy rules discussions that disrupt the flow of the game session are something that people disliked. People also explicitly said rules lawyering as things that they don't like. Having a cast that's incompatible or doesn't gel well together or doesn't seem to get along. Having a person who has main character syndrome, that doesn't share the spotlight, that isn't mindful of the amount of space that they're taking up in the session, is something that people don't like. Toxic fandoms were mentioned. Crosstalk with the table, across the table. Advertisements. Not balancing the pillars of play. So being too heavy into combat, too heavy into RP, or too heavy into exploration, and not balancing those. Any kind of technical difficulties, lacking diversity, issues with editing and production. People who value performing over playing the game was something that was mentioned. Min-maxing. Breaking the fourth wall from players and visuals were some of the other things that got brought up. All right. So speaking of pillars of play, one of the themes that I kind of pulled out from both the interviews as well as as some of these free responses is the idea of balance. So again, as I mentioned, for every person who says too much roleplay, there's somebody else who is saying too much combat. And I think really what's happening here is that there is a balance that needs to happen. What about if you live with a min-max rules lawyer? There's nothing you can do about that wreck. So balance is the key. And so for this, yes, this is largely D&D, but a lot of TTRPGs use this setup as well. Is the pillars of play are social interaction, exploration, and combat. And so it's interesting because when you ask people, kind of to dig into these components, it's that role play or combat sessions don't seem to push the story forward. So if it's so role play heavy that, you know, if it's so role play heavy, that's fine, so long as the story is being pushed forward. If your session, or like if it's combat heavy, that's fine if the combat is pushing the story forward. Exploration, if it's so focused on that, it's fine as long as it's pushing the story forward and as long as you're balancing it out. So if you have a combat heavy session, maybe the next session should be more social interaction and exploration. But in theory, you should have all three elements of these during your session. And when it comes to an AP in particular, you want to be mindful of progressing the story. You don't want the story to feel like it stalled. There were a number of people who mentioned issues with it not progressing, or it feeling like things stalled, or that the story is spinning its wheels. So you want to make sure that when you have these pillars, that really balance is the key. So one of the things that got mentioned quite a bit was rule of cool versus adhering to the mechanics. And so rule of cool works and works well so long as you're not disrespecting, to use one of the some of the words from people who responded. So long as you're not completely disregarding or disrespecting the system, it's okay to have rule of cool every now and then. But like balancing out your mechanics with rule of cool, because people like rule of cool, but people also like the system being respected. People like, again, part of the reason why people are tuning into APs, at least for some of them, is that they're trying to learn the mechanics of the game, or they're trying to get ideas that they could then take back to their table. They're trying to be like, hey, I've never played an arcane trickster rogue, so I'm gonna watch this AP where somebody's playing an arcane trickster rogue to get an idea of how they could play it. Or I've never played Blades in the Dark, and so I'm gonna go and watch this AP so I can figure out how to play Blades in the Dark, or how to run Blades in the Dark. And so you want to like find that balance between something being super compelling and super rule of cool with while still maintaining respect for the system that you're using and system that you're playing the game of. Because once you've rule of cooled or disregarded so many elements of the system, it's no longer that particular system and that particular game. So you want to strike that balance of respecting the system that you're using while still kind of being action oriented and allowing people to do some things that are outside of the system or outside of the box. And so another theme that came from this qualitative feedback is the idea of breaking immersion. So the things that people dislike, or the things that came up, all kind of hit on breaking immersion from the game. Things like player indecision, rules disruptions, people joking and goofing off during the session. Some jokes are good, but when everybody's distracted and goofing, it breaks the immersion from the story and from the game that is happening. Things like poor audio, crunchy audio, it breaks the immersion. Technical difficulty with streaming and lag, audio issues, things like that. It's breaking people's immersion. When you break the fourth wall as a player to talk to the audience or make a joke, you're breaking immersion for people. Shopping episodes, for better or worse, break immersion and stop the flow of the story. Yeah, they're important, but again, they're stopping the flow of the story and it's not driving the story forward. Heresy. Yes. Listen, best NPCs made up on the fly came from shopping episodes. Just saying. All right. Now, let's talk about combat. So we just talked about breaking immersion. You know what? I love shopping episodes too. I as a GM, my favorite thing is coming up with wild NPCs. So I do enjoy shopping episodes as well. So let's talk about combat, because combat came up a lot as something that people don't like, but specifically they don't like when it drags on. They don't like when it takes forever. And again, this is related to the breaking of immersion. We've all, you know, assuming everybody here has probably consumed some APs, considered this is an APs channel, and considered the topic. Hello, Vax. The combat can get rote, and we've all seen sessions where people can be super in character and super committed, but then as soon as combat happens, the character drops. So combat is an opportunity to roleplay. Combat is an opportunity for you to describe what your character is doing and how they're doing it and what they look like. Describing the action is still a part of roleplay. And so it gives you an opportunity to, if you're a person playing it, it gives you an opportunity to add additional role play. It's just not the same role play that you're used to. So it is something that you can use as a challenge creatively to incorporate your role play into combat. My favorite combats from as a player and as a GM are when there's character banter going back and forth, and when people describe what they're doing really well. Again, and people like it when it's smooth. So things like rules disruptions are things that will stop and slow down combat. So it's almost better to make a quick decision and then resolve it later, than it is to stop the flow of combat. Additionally, you know, when things get rote and people stop describing what they're doing and they just start throwing out the numbers, that's when it gets boring to people. So if you're gonna have, like, you know, work with what works best at your table, but try to keep the combat moving as much as you possibly can. I know that this is where I'm gonna be like, this is where I'm gonna say some things that people are not gonna like. We all love our physical dice. I know them. No, we love our pretty, shiny math rocks. But you can go so much faster with digital rollers in an AP than you can with physical. I will, as a GM, I'm gonna shamelessly shout out 5e tools. You can also do this on D&D Beyond, but 5e tools allows me to roll everything in the tab with in the window with the description. I can open up multiple spells and have it set up. I can have multiple monsters set up, and I can just click and automatically roll everything, roll my damage, things of that nature. And it has seriously improved the speed that I can do combats. So yeah, doing things like using digital rollers will help with that. I know I love the shiny, tasty math rocks just as much as anybody else. But doing things to keep the flow going will help. And again, this is also very D&D heavy, but other systems do have combat and do have rolling as well. So, you know, to the extent that you can do digitally roll and not have to math while you're on air or live or however you're doing it, will help speed up and smooth out combat and would reduce the need for editing. Stream math is harder than real math for sure. Okay, so one of the things that I asked during the interviews was why APs? So, and the way I presented this question was, you know, I asked people to tell me a little bit about the genres of things that are kind of tangentially related to APs. So if you know, D&D is high fantasy, cyberpunk as well, cyberpunk. Blades in the Dark is kind of a Victorian, gothic, spooky, ghosty vibe to it. So there's all these genres that exist. We have Starfinder, that's space. We have Star Wars, that's space, and you know, all of these things that are related. And so sci-fi fantasy, it has, and superheroes and all of that, like, you could spend an evening binge watching The Mandalorian. You could also spend the evening watching an AP or listening to a podcast AP. When we all have such limited time that we can spend doing the things we want as opposed to doing the things that we have to do to survive, what makes people choose an AP? Because that's exciting to me. That's exciting to me. Like, why would you spend this limited resource on this thing that's asking a lot of your time? And what really, because that's the magic. That's where you get into the magic of an AP. So some of the things were the randomness that the dice provides. Sure, reading a book is great. It's a complete story. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And no matter what, that story's going to be the same. We have dice that can change the story. You can have your boss fight in a combat, and players can make all the best decisions, but they could roll a night of nat ones the entire time that could lead to a grueling defeat that then makes the story better. Dice provide that randomness to the story. There's the collaborative storytelling bit of it. It's not just one person telling this story. It's a group of people getting together and collaboratively telling the story, which adds to that element of you don't know what's going to happen because the players also don't know what's going to happen. You, the audience, are finding out what's happening at the exact same time that the players are finding out about it. And there is that feeling that you're at the table with people. People celebrate the nat 20s. They cheer the players on just like people cheer on their favorite athletes and their favorite sports team, because it's just as exciting to see somebody get a nat 20 on that moment that they really, really needed it. And that's exciting because you don't know what's going to happen. And really what keeps people coming back, what I asked people was, you know, hey, you check out an AP for one time. What makes you come back for it? And typically what people are coming back for is the story seemed really cool, or that there's interesting characters that are driving that story. I feel like I have not paid attention to chat, so I'm going to take a quick moment and take a look. It's mostly space, but let's see if there was any questions there. Nice facts. I'm hoping to get to play a bard soon. Adding dice. Yeah, I like that. No fame. Because, yeah, the GM also doesn't know what's going to happen. You, like, as a GM, you can have the best planned things, but then you get there and the players are like, we're going to go down this rabbit hole. And you're like, well, I'll use that later. Thank you, Marked Edge. All right. Okay. All right. So now we're getting towards the end. So I've said a handful of these things, but so you want to apply some of the things that I've said to your AP. These are the kind of my recommendations based on the data and based on what I heard from people and what I read from people. What I would recommend if you were going to be producing an AP, or if you wanted to take this to the AP that you have. First and foremost, consider your audience. Remember that they are multitasking and that they are consuming video APs, but they are primarily listening to them or only partially watching. So because we know that the audience is typically multitasking, we know that we need to prioritize audio. Make sure your audio is as crisp and as clean as it possibly can be. There's great tutorials out there for even with the kind of getting the best quality you absolutely possibly can from what you have. And that even involves working well within your budget. You don't have to have, you don't have to have the Shure. You don't have to have the most expensive XRL microphone with the best mix amp possible. Sure, it helps, but like dialing in on the audio that and working with what you have within your price range to get it as good as possible is going to serve you dividends. Again, typically people are primarily listening and or only partially watching. So get that audio as good as it possibly can. If you're going to have visual elements to your AP, your visual elements should be clear and should be accessible. If you want to like a nitty gritty way to test it, take a look at your overlay. If you're doing any kind of visual thing, take a look at your overlay and reduce it to about 1/4 your screen size. And can you visually see what it says? Can you read everything that is on there on that quarter of your screen? If not, you should probably change your font or check out making sure that like everything's legible. If you're worried about your color palette and making sure that the font stands out against the background, there's websites that will let you can plug in the hex code of the background and the font, and it will present you with the accessibility and how easy it is. And that will also show you if people how people who are various colorblinds have the various different types of color blindness, how they see it and whether or not it is legible. So there are neat little tricks that you can do to help improve the visual accessibility of your visual presentation. Including captions. Everyone likes them. And, just having closed captions helps improve the accessibility of it, even for those who don't need it, but especially for those who do. So go ahead and include captions. Now, when it comes to the types of information that you include, if you're going to include visual information on the screen, prioritize the important information that is needed to get at a glance. So assume that the people who are consuming your AP are not primarily focused on your AP, and that they're probably coming into the middle of it. They're not necessarily starting at the beginning. They're jumping in at some random spot. So they need to know the characters' names first and foremost. The characters' names are more important than the person performing the names. You can get that information at the beginning or at the end. It doesn't necessarily have to be there. But for the person to understand what is happening right then and there, you need to have the character names, followed by the information that tends to not change from session to session. So things like the class that they're using or the playbook, or class or playbook. I think there's other terms for it. But those things that let you know a little bit more about the character that you can get quickly at a glance, followed by the static stats. So the things that are not going to change from session to session. So this could be like in D&D, intelligence, charisma, things like that. But again, you don't really need that information. What you really need is the character name followed by the class or playbook. And then the dynamic stats, if you have room. Because again, remember, you want to reduce that overlay to 1/4 of your screen. And if you can't see it, then, do things like cut stuff from it so that you can make the things that need to be there bigger. Yeah. Okay. I'll come circle back to that marked. Okay, next things. Your cast needs to play well together and have chemistry. So use session zeros. This is a great way to just kind of get a feel for how people work together. And also maybe you have a group that works really, really well together, but you want to expand your group. One thing I would recommend would be having most of the people at the table be people you're comfortable with and that you know well, and then just introduce like one new person to the group that you think would work well together and get a feel for it during the session zero. So try to not have everybody be strangers, but if you do have a session zero, maybe even play a quick session with the characters that are not related to the story to get a feel of how people play together. Because the more comfortable people are with each other and their pacing of and how they talk, you're less likely to get crosstalk. You're less likely to get people talking over one another. Being at the same table helps, but a lot of us play with people from various parts of the country or different countries altogether. So just having that familiarity allows people to have better chemistry and work well together. Avoid main character syndrome. So share the spotlight. If this may come onto the GM or the DMs, but trying to switch when somebody's being a little too heavy. Now there are sessions from time to time that are going to be character centric, which is okay. And like knowing the difference between someone who is putting themselves into the middle of of everything all the time versus, you know, someone just having a heavy character session. So being I like the Powered by the Apocalypse system. There's all of their books have a great section about sharing the spotlight and moving the spotlight, which I think is a good thing for people who are showrunners to read and consume, because it helps you kind of with your pacing and trying to avoid it. But if you see it happening, it may be a good idea to try to have a conversation with people. But yeah, try to avoid main character syndrome as much as possible. Remember, people find APs through word of mouth and through social media. So if you have an AP, it's probably a good idea to network with other people who have APs. Remember, other people who have APs are also more likely to subscribe to your channel. And yeah, and also more likely to be in your next AP. So people find out about APs through word of mouth and social media. So networking is probably a good idea if you have an AP. People come back for the story. So they may stumble onto your channel through word of mouth or through social media or through the algorithm recommending a channel to them. What's going to get them to come back is the story. So having a good story and a good story that everyone's working towards, that everyone's invested in, is tantamount to having people come back to your show. And again, role play, combat, exploration, those pillars of play should drive the story forward. Your story shouldn't stop because role play is happening. Your story shouldn't stop because combat is happening. Your story shouldn't stop because exploration is happening. These should all be opportunities to continue driving the story forward. And it's not just the GM or DM's job to drive the story forward. It's also the players. So having players that are invested in that story will help to drive it forward. People watch APs in some part to be able to learn. This means learning mechanics. This means learning the rules of a new game. And this means getting cool, crazy ideas to bring back to their own table or to their own AP. Personally, I have shamelessly stolen ideas from other APs and brought them to my home games, or I love ripping off anytime I see a DM do something cool. I'm like, I'm gonna just put that in the back of my brain and I'm going to use it whenever I have an opportunity. Yes, stolen or learned from. Either way, like that's part of watching them, is getting cool ideas from other cool people. Okay, rule of cool is good, so long as it doesn't always happen and that your system is still respected. Because again, people are in some part watching to learn. And so, you know, you don't want to always default to rule of cool, but you also don't always want to, well, yeah, mechanically you can't do that. It's finding the balance of yeah, I'm gonna let you do this thing because it's gonna be really cool, but it's not gonna completely break the system to where we're not playing the same game anymore. And then yeah, people watch also to feel included. They watch as a proxy for play, and they watch to support cast members and content creators that they enjoy. So to the extent that you can build a community around your AP where people feel included, they feel part of the game, they feel part of this AP. They're invested in it. They feel like they're getting to have the experience that they're playing. So you want to have those moments still in your AP. Don't edit out all of the gameplay to where it no longer feels like a game. Because people want to have that feeling that they are a part of something, that they are included in something, whether they, so they like to feel the same emotions that people are feeling. Okay. So with that, I think I'd just like to say thank you. And I will circle back to some of the questions, but you can find me on Twitter as DrPsychOwl TV. If you have additional questions, I'm going to do a little Q&A here, but if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to GutPunchRP@gmail.com. You can also find us here on Twitch right now or on YouTube at GutPunchRP. The VOD for this will be available for, I believe, like a week or 2 weeks. I can't remember what we have Twitch set up to, but this will also be available on YouTube. I'm probably going to find another time to rerun this thing, and I'll sit in chat and answer additional questions if people have more questions. I'll pick a time and I'll post that on our social media. You can find us at GutPunchRP on Twitter as well. So yeah, if you have any questions at this time, feel free to put them in chat. I'm also going to scroll up a little bit because I know Marked Edge had a question. So let me take a look at that. And if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in chat right now. So Marked Edge asked, did anything go against your prior thoughts on what made effective AP content? I feel like yes. I was honestly surprised by the edited part of it. I think in part because I had seen a lot of people who were recommending doing things edited on Twitter. And so I was really surprised that that people who were audience only were almost like, in some of the comments, were almost like, no, not only not important, but wanted to be able to say like, I absolutely don't want it. That was something that was striking to me. And so that was something that I wanted to explore more and dig into a little bit more with people. And really what it boiled down to is that people want to feel included at the table, and they want it to feel like a game. And so they want to know when they find out that it's edited, or when they see that it's edited, there is an element of, well, what did I miss? What's not there that I didn't see? And so that was something that was kind of surprising to me. I'm trying to think if there were other things that were surprising to me. I kind of figured COVID would have an impact, but I was a little surprised that that and this may be my bias because I started I started watching APs regularly pre-pandemic, and so I was a little surprised that 30% of the sample were post-COVID, that or because of COVID started consuming APs. But in hindsight, well, hindsight bias, but anyway, but that was something that was surprising. Yeah. I think on in some ways some of the results were not necessarily didn't go against any of the hypotheses I had. I actually part of the reason I did the study was that I my knowledge of, you know, basic psychology of how people tend to act and tend to think and tend to feel in various situations made me realize that some of the anecdotes that were going around in social media in the AP space didn't really mesh well with how people tend to react. And so that was part of why I wanted to do this project. That I was like, there are a lot of people who are handful of people who are saying things and saying them strongly, but, you know, don't really have the evidence to back it up. And so that's part of why I wanted to do it. Now I'm going to scroll, try and catch up. Is this talk a normal thing for the channel? No, we tend to just run APs. But I mean, this is actually something not necessarily specifically about APs, but this is something that I've thought about doing for a little bit, of having different kind of research related talks. Specifically, so this is a little tangent, but one of the things that I've done on the long running campaign that I've ran on this channel is I created a reveal, or like a twist that was happening to one of the characters on the channel, Annabelle. And I did this through knowing what function dreams serve, because dreams are an artifact of your memory consolidation. So it's taking all of the events from your recent events from your memory and trying to fit them in with how they fit with everything else. And so what you experience as a dream is your brain trying to make sense of everything and draw connections. And so with that in mind, I created a situation where the character had some missing memories and would have dream experiences that were all similar but a little different, in order to kind of reveal what was happening. So I've thought about doing some talks where, like, I break down some different research and how you can use that in your AP, or different ideas that you could do. So that is something that I've had a thought about doing. But no, this is not something that is normal for the channel. This is in part because I was part of the big tech layoffs that happened, and so this was something that I could do to feel like I was doing work and to fill my time. And also was something that I cared about and wanted to be able to give back to the community and hopefully do something that helps. Thank you, Old Slow Tiger. Thank you, Justin. BDO does have an amazing mic. That is true. Yes, this will be uploaded to YouTube in a couple of days. That's also was mentioned. Yeah, I was happy to see that most people thought diversity was something that should be included. So they value, okay, from Marked Edge. So they value largely authentic, balanced experiences driven by story with accessible features, Do you feel like the dislike of editing comes down to the authenticity? I think so. I think, yes, I think you're hitting on it. I think editing can be done and can be done well. But where I think people dislike it is when things start to feel like it's scripted. And so you lose some of that magic that comes from things being authentic, as you put it, or things lose some of that improvisational nature that comes from the table. Because, you know, one of the things that I asked people about was those memorable moments. And like, part of the reason those moments are so memorable is that they are unscripted, that, you know, yes, you have moments that are imperfect. You have moments where you maybe stumble over your words, or you just don't quite hit the feeling that you want to hit. But because you have some of those imperfect moments, it makes the really, really good moments that much more special. It's that those moments are special because they are authentic, as you put it. They are, they happened in that specific particular moment in time, and they are almost magical because it's not something that could have been recreated even if people tried to do it. There's something about the way it happened right then, right there, no editing, no takes of it. It was just that live, lived moment for everybody. All right, here is a question. I know you touched on it, but generally, how different would these results look with just non-AP playing audience? So if it was just a non-AP audience, we would see a stronger preference for unedited content. We would actually see less of a preference for representation. We would also see less of, people would not value, having a, any kind of like combat map, of any, in any way. And let me double check one thing real quick to make sure because I sent some of this stuff to myself. So give me 2 seconds. We wouldn't see as much of a preference for chat moderation. Or wouldn't see that as important. Romance was something that was seen as more important for people who participate in APs than for those who don't. Game mechanics were seen as more important for the audience. But for the most part, the rest of the things were all shared across both. All right. All right. Okay. So with that, I think we have all the questions done and whatnot. Thank you so much for hanging out. Let me... Don't go anywhere just yet. Let me... What AP are you associated with? This one. I am, I am, the, I am part of GutPunchRP. I run Laurelwind on or Laurelwind Shadows Fell on our alternating Mondays. I am a player in our Blades in the Dark campaign that is on Friday. I am a player in the Blighted North campaign that is on our on Wednesdays that we're going to be having our final session of this time next week. Yeah, so you can find me on this channel. I may do some other things in the not too distant future on some other channels. I'm gonna... Give me 2 seconds. But yeah, you can find me on those things. You can find me on Twitter. Yeah, on Laurelwind, we're on in the middle of a boss fight. The players are technically fighting a demigod, I believe. All right. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and hop off, but hang around. I'm gonna raid Girls Run the World, so just hang out and join the raid, and should be a good time. So thank you all for hanging out with me and letting me nerd out with some researchy things. So until next time, you know, be good people. That seems like a good closing. I like to end a stream with a little bit of a feeling, and I feel like I've done that. So good night, everyone.